Okay, good afternoon everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. Last week of classes, we're almost done. So today we will go over the practice final, which I have posted online last week. Hopefully you guys tried it at home. If you did, you can compare your answers to the correct ones. If not, then it will still be helpful, but probably not as helpful. So the final will be next Tuesday, and it will be on the entire material of the class, as you hopefully can see. And since you also are done with the last homework, I will update your homework grades by next week, probably in the next couple of days. So the canvas will show 3/4 of your grade already determined. The first two exams and also the homework. The final will be 1/4 of that, of the total. So you already can have a good idea where you are heading with your grade, but of course you can still improve it, or you can make it worse depending on what you get on the final. You can do some simple calculations, see what you actually can achieve there. So for example, if you have something like 75% right now as your total, that is a C. If you get 100% on the final or 95% on the final, you probably will improve it considerably. You will get somewhere, push it somewhere into the 80s, so that would then be like B minus or even a B, right? But this is just an example. It obviously is different for different students. Some students already have such a great results on other parts that they don't even need that much to get an A in class. For other students, it may be a tough climb to even get a passing grade because they are doing so badly. Who knows? There is variety of different situations, and obviously I can't tell you about everybody in class, but if you're curious about your own situation, just look at your results, and if you have any questions you can message me. The grade will obviously be determined based on what percentage you have in the end. Overall the class was doing reasonably well, better than when it is in the classroom. Part of the reason is because I'm sure that when you take in these exams at home and you have all the notes available and the book available and whatever else, many of the questions you do much better on. For this reason, I don't think I'll be curving it this year at all, because it looks like there'll be plenty of A's and plenty of good grades without any curving. So if you are not doing that well, that you only have yourselves to blame, because everybody is in the same boat, everybody doing the same material. If some people are getting an A, that means they really it is doable, right? It is doable. So if we have number of people in class who are getting an A and number of people who are getting a B and so on, that shows that the material is reasonably challenging but not too challenging, and so there's no reason why I should curve it. Okay, now like I said, for today we will just go over the practice exam. Let's take a look at the questions on practice exam. Let's see what are the answers. The first question is actually a very, very good one. It gives you an example of an argument and then it asks you to evaluate. Is it inductive or deductive? And further, strong, weak, valid, invalid, and so on. Now, is this deductive or is this inductive argument? That's the first part of the question. No theocracies are true democracies. No secular governments are theocracies. Thus, some secular governments are true democracies. What do you think? You should, of course, remember, well, the question is it deductive or inductive? Don't jump ahead with the option letter. Is it inductive or is it deductive, and why? what are the types of the arguments. Because remember, it's a review. The question on the final may be differently phrased, but the point will still be similar. You have to be able to determine what are deductive and what are inductive arguments. So what is this? Okay, I'm looking first of all for something more specific. If you get what it is more specifically, you will be able to determine whether it's inductive or deductive. What does it sound like? No theocracies are true democracies, no secular governments are theocracies. Okay, hint to you guys. The entire chapter 5 was on this. And this is categorical syllogism. That's what it is. Categorical syllogism. And if you, as soon as you realize it's a categorical syllogism, you immediately have your answer that it is deductive argument. This is a deductive type of an argument. Categorical syllogisms, as well as disjunctive and hypothetical syllogisms, are types of deductive arguments. There's two other types of deductive arguments we mentioned, which are based on math and based on definition. So this is the 5 we were talking about. 3 types of syllogisms, math, definition. Okay, since it is deductive, you have 3 options for a correct answer, B, D, and E. Now, one of them you can also eliminate right away. Which one is it? It's the right way, but let's not jump there yet. So, which one do you eliminate right away? The one which has cogent, right? Yeah, because it cannot be cogent under any circumstances. Cogent doesn't even apply to deductive arguments. You can only have cogent if it is inductive and strong. If it is both inductive and strong, you further look whether or not it also is all true, and in that case it would be cogent. If it's not all true, it can still be inductive strong but not cogent, uncogent. Okay, so that's not your option. Your only 2 options would be between invalid and valid. Now yes, you can approach it in 2 different ways. For both of them, you need first of all to get the form of this argument. And remember, to get the form, you just replace your terms with capital letters. So no, let's say T, R, well, we can't use T again, so D, and no S, R, T, and so the conclusion here is sum S, R, D, true democracy. Okay, you got your form. So now what can you do? There's 2 ways, remember. One way is you can figure out your mood and figure and look it up in a table. You have tables right there in the book. That's the easiest way to go for some students. So if you do that, you will get that this is E, right? This is also E, and this is I. So EEI, and which figure is it? You strike the line through your T's, and your answer is it is 1. EEE1, you can look it up in the table. Now, there is another way to go, and this is indeed with Venn diagrams. Which one is better for you, I don't know, but like either one of them is fine, I suppose. So let's try it with Venn diagrams. Let's do it on the board. So again, no T R D, no, what is it? S R T. And the conclusion is sum S R D. How do you do Venn diagram for that? Remember, first step, you draw the circles. That is something you always need to do. Okay, how do you name them? The bottom two, just look at your conclusion, S and D, and the remaining middle term is on top. Okay, you're done with the naming. What's the next step? The next step is to figure out which premise you are starting with, but in this case, it doesn't matter, right? Both of them are universal. If one of them was not universal, you would start with the universal one. Since they're both universal, we can start on top, no DRT. How do you do that one? Well, let me do it with a different color, perhaps. You look for T and D circle. This is your T circle, this is your D circle. You're supposed to block the area between them. This is your area, you block it. There's nothing here. No S or T. Similarly, this is your T circle, this is your S circle. You block the area between them. This is the area. Lovely. You look for your conclusion. Is it supported here? Now, what would it look like for it to be supported? Well, remember, some S or D would have to have an X in the middle. Do you have an X in the middle there? No. The simple answer is, of course, no. Where do you see an X? There's no X. This is just blocked, so it's just colored. There's no X. Therefore, it is invalid because it's not supported. So the correct answer would be B, deductive invalid. Looks like nobody answered it correctly. Sorry, jumped ahead. Deductive invalid. Okay, if you look at it in the table, you will also see it's not there. For the same reason, it is invalid. Okay. Now, I guess that may be a little challenging, but nonetheless, it's a good question because remember, it kind of brings together the stuff we did at the beginning of the class, the stuff we did in chapter 5, and kind of gives you an idea why did we do all that stuff, so that we'll be able to answer this kind of a question. Now, one of those argument questions, you'll be given a passage and you have to figure out, is it an argument, and if so, what's the conclusion? So in this case, is it an argument? Really should not be a very difficult question. And the simple answer to that is no. It is not an argument because note that it is very similar to some of the examples we had before. It's a report. Types of non-arguments, non-inferential passages, which includes report, expository, illustrations, explanations, and conditional statements. The example we had in class is from the same exact book, Steven Spiegel, World of Politics and New Year. Pay attention to the examples we used in class. More often than not, they serve as a very good guide for other questions. So this is an example of a report, and it is, of course, not an argument. Okay, which of the following is not an inductive argument? Not an inductive. So it would then be deductive, right? Yes, just like we refreshed our memory on a few minutes ago, there are 5 types of deductive arguments we talked about in class. Arguments from definition is one of them. So that would be the one. All the other ones are inductive, based on signs, inference, causal inference, analogy, and prediction, all inductive arguments. So again, the difference between deduction and induction you should really know well. This is like one of the key questions of the class. I guarantee you there'll be a question on that. What's the difference? Deductive reasoning based on necessary reasoning. The conclusion is guaranteed to be true. So if the premise is a true, conclusion will always be true if it is valid deductive argument, and that is the goal here. Inductive arguments, you never have this kind of certainty. It's probabilistic reasoning. You only have probabilities. It is more or less likely to be true. We're looking for 50% threshold. If it is more than 50% likely, it is strong. and of course it can be more strong or less strong, but if it is over 50 it is strong. If it's less than 50 it is weak, and again it can be weaker or it can be not as weak, but it will then be weak. The forms of the inductive arguments which you should know: predictions about the future, always inductive, you can never predict future with 100% certainty. Arguments from analogy, when you comparing two things. Inductive generalizations, remember statistics, when you're trying to take a sample and generalize it to the whole. Every time you do that, you can get it off by certain whatever amount, which depends on how good your method is, but nonetheless you will never get complete certainty. Arguments from authority, if it's somebody else's authority, it may be good authority, bad authority, always chance for an error. Arguments based on science, something like road signs, plaques, on monuments and so on, that would be examples. Again, they are usually rather reliable but never 100%. And causal inferences, when you try to figure out something based on either going from cause to effect or from effect to cause, that will always be again open to possibility of an error. And deductive forms, once again, mathematics, based on mathematics, from definition, and three types of syllogisms: categorical, hypothetical, and disjunctive. Categorical syllogisms was dealt with in chapter 5. The entire chapter 5 we were dealing with categorical ones. Categories, three categories, two categories in each premise, and in a conclusion, 3 total. How are they related to each other? Hypothetical and disjunctive, that is chapter 6. We saw both of them as forms of deductive arguments. Disjunctive syllogism, which starts with disjunction, either P or Q. Hypothetical starts with conditional statement: if P, then Q. So this is the examples. Okay. Which of the following statements expresses a value claim? So what is a value claim? Do you remember the definition of a value claim? Yes, something is good, bad, better, worse, more important or less important than some other thing. Good, bad is a best indicator. So is any of it suggesting that something is good or bad? Remember, it doesn't have to be the words good or bad, but saying yes, that Professor Thompson is a great instructor is just another way of saying he is good. That's what it means. Now, why would it be a value claim? Well, obviously that is not a fact, right? People can disagree about it, and if you look at myprofessor.com, you will see that people do disagree about it almost every single time. It's almost impossible for somebody to have all good reviews or all bad reviews. Some professors have a lot of bad reviews, but there's always that occasional person who says, "What are you all talking about? He actually is great. I loved him." And the other way around, you can have a lot of good reviews, but then there's this one person who got an F probably or something, or for whatever other reason he is very unhappy and leaves a really bad review. Because reality also is that, let's face it, when students do badly in class, they do have a tendency of not blaming themselves, instead blaming professor, because they are saying, well, professor was not very clear, I had trouble understanding him, he was unfair, he didn't explain it well, and so on. So that, of course, is always more self-satisfying, because well, if it's not your fault, if it's professor's fault, then you are okay, right? But sometimes it may be true, but in many cases it's not. In any case, that is one of these situations when you have to keep in mind that, of course, people have different opinions about whether something is good or bad. And that's why one of the reasons we call it value claim. Depends on your values, depends on how you value something else. Okay, so again, good, bad, right, wrong, or better, worse, more important, or less important. Note that there's slides from the previous lectures. I included them so that it would be easier for you guys to do the review. I will, of course, upload this PowerPoint presentation, and of course, I will also upload a video of this lecture so you can either watch the video or go through the slides in your own time, and it will help you to refresh your memory about this stuff. You don't have to go back to those previous lectures and go through these 1,000 different slides. Minimally, that will give you what you need to know. Although again, remember, the first day I will have additional review which will be meant to fill up some gaps, because we're not going to cover everything. Today is just based on that practice exam, but there may be some areas, or there are some areas which we still need to cover, and that we'll do on Thursday. Which of the following statements is vague? Now, remember what vagueness is, and how is it different from ambiguity. So what is vagueness? And the simple answer is when you don't know where to draw the line. Remember the words such as poor. Who is poor? Where does poor begin? Where does poor end? Well, if the meaning can be interpreted different, that actually would be ambiguity. Several distinct meanings. No, vagueness would be you don't know where to draw the line. The meaning is clear. We all know what poor is. But who is poor? What's the amount of money? What is the exact amount? So here, which one is vague? Mr. Adams is really quite young. Yes, look, see that this is a great example. Quite young. Where do you draw the line? What does that mean? What's his age? Is it 20, 25, 30? Where exactly? You can probably say that if somebody is 85 years old, they are not quite young. You can also say that if somebody 15 years old, they are quite young. But in between that, where do you draw the line? Now that is the question. So this is a very good example. Same thing with poverty, rich, and so on. That is the correct answer. Now ambiguity, on the other hand, again, multiple meanings. So which one here is ambiguous? Which one has more than one clear meaning? Bill's attitudes are normal for a teenager. What's the different meaning here? There's actually a much better one. Yes. A. Paul watched Kathy throw a ball through the window. So, did he watch it through the window, or did she throw it through the window? Note that this is a very different meaning. So he could have been watching through the window as she threw it, let's say, in the garden. That's one meaning. The other meaning is he was in the garden and she was throwing it through the window. Right? A very different thing. So that is two distinct meanings. Usually it is funny, here it's not very funny, but nonetheless, this is the correct answer. Attitudes been normal for a teenager, that may be a little vague, but I don't think it is actually ambiguous. I don't think you can read the word normal in many different ways. I suppose you could, but not in this context. Okay. Don't overthink it. That usually is more clear cut. Remember the ambiguity, two distinct meanings. Now, which of the following pairs of terms have the same extension? Again, with extension, there could be a couple of situations when they have the same extension. One of them is easier to remember than the other one. So in this case, what would have the same extension? Think of yourself also in terms of what extension is, because that can help you eliminate some of them. So if we put a term in the middle, such as Kansas, okay, we will have extension here and intension on the other side. Remember, members of the term, what the term denotes, would be your extension. How do you pick out members? What you can point at and say Kansas. That's your extension. Are you ever going to point at Nebraska and say Kansas? Well, if you do, Nebraskans will kill you probably, or at least will not be very happy. No, that is definitely not the correct choice. So what is the correct choice? Because for Kansas, the only member of this term would be Kansas itself. And it clearly is not the same as Nebraska. There's an easier way out of it. Remember, if it is empty, if there is nothing there, then it will be equal to another empty extension. Which two terms here have an empty extension? Yes, elf and gnome. They don't exist. There's nothing you can point at and say elf, unless you are crazy or something. Then maybe you can see them in the corner of your room. But for normal people, that would not be the case. Again, let's look at actor and actress. If you put actor here, who would you point at and say actor? Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise. Would you point at Jack Nicholson and say actress? What crazy person would do that? Would Jack Nicholson be happy about that? I don't think so. Who would you point at and say actress? Brooke Shields? I don't know. You can name them, right? Not the same thing. Again. Now, if it's empty, it's the same. What other situations can you have and it could be the same? Well, let's see about that. For example, George Washington and first president of the United States. If you point at George Washington and say George Washington, isn't it the same person you would point at and say first president of the United States? Yes. Remember, this is members of the class. So this is individuals. This is some sort of units. Individuals as in individual state, individual football player, individual elf, and so on. There's no individual elves. There are individual football players. Would all football players be pointed at and said linebacker? No. That's why it's not the correct choice. Would all professors be pointed at and said instructor? Well, that way actually yes, but not the other way though. You cannot point at instructor and say professor, because not all instructors are professors. Some instructors are, some instructors are not. So again, this is not the correct choice. It has to match exactly. So both sets of members must be exactly identical, such as with George Washington and first president. George Washington would have one member, George Washington, and that would be exact same member as first president of the United States. Again, just one member, exactly the same one as George Washington. Now that is the same extension. None of these other ones are the same. Elf and gnome are the same because there's 0 there, and 0 is also equal to 0. If you can't point at anything in this case, you can't point at anything in this case, then you have the same extension. This is important to understand. We had that before, and once again, you guys are getting confused. When you're talking about Nebraska and Kansas being state, that has nothing to do with members of the class Nebraska and Kansas. State is not a member of any class. In fact, them both being states would actually be type of an extension. This is a tribute we are looking for. Type of intention, sorry. Intention on that side. Attribute. They both are states, but it's not extension. Extension, it's just individual members which this term picks out. Okay, sounds like you do need to do some work on that one. And there is some examples we had in class. So again, inventor, term inventor. who it picks out? Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, Samuel Morse. Why? Because you point at Thomas Edison and you say inventor. You point at Alexander Graham Bell and you say inventor. And attributes or intention we're looking for, that would be clever, intuitive, creative, imaginative, and so on. So this is what your intention is, this is what your extension is. You have to understand the difference between them. Now based on that, which of the following groups of terms are in order of increasing intension? So again, remember that if we put extension here and we put intention here, how do we figure it out? Extension is always easiest one because this is all the members. So increasing extension would just be like more and more members. So if we go in this direction, you start with like 1 member, 2, 10, 15, 100, 1,000, million, whatever. That's increasing extension. Increasing intention would go the other way around. So in the same direction, it would go from the broadest to the narrowest. The first term would have most members, and then fewer and fewer and fewer. If you do it this way, you can immediately see what's the broadest term. What is the term which has the most members? Plant. And that's your correct answer right there. And then it goes more and more specific. Flower, daisy, Shasta daisy. Okay. Well, that's okay. It doesn't really matter whether it's capital or not. Remember that on the exam they're actually not going to be A, B, C, and D, right? It's just going to be a bunch of choices and you can pick any one of them. The way it is on Canvas is not by alphabet. So you just have to know which one it is. Okay, so again, reminder of intention, extension, and so on. Now, fallacies. This is one of the potential fallacies. With fallacies, again, remember, we will cover some fallacies today. We will cover some fallacies additionally on Thursday. The fallacies we'll cover most of the fallacies on the final, but not all of them. Why? Well, because you actually have to know all of them. So if you want to get all the questions right, you have to go back yourself and refresh your memory on all the fallacies. This is just an example of what might be on the final, not an exhaustive list. Although they do cover, like I said, some of them too. 25, just the same as the previous two exams. In fact, it will be very similar, except it will have some of the, again, questions just like on the practice exam from the previous topics, so throughout the entire course, but it will also be 25 questions. It will also be 45 minutes time limit. So in that sense, it is very similar. Okay, so Ginger, I saw you outside the Opera House the other night. Tell me, why don't you enjoy ordinary musical events like normal people do? That is an easy one, right? Hopefully everybody can get it right. So which one is it? Complex question, yes. Loaded question, more than one question in the same one. And again, doesn't mean there's necessarily going to be complex question on the final. Maybe a different fallacy. Just an example. Okay, some of the questions will be like this. So this is based on chapter 5. You have to know how to draw Venn diagrams. Note that it's a little bit easier than what we did in chapter 5 because it doesn't actually ask you whether it's valid or not. It just asks you how do you draw it. But you have to know at least this much. So how do you draw it? First of all, in this case, where do you start? Yes, you start with the universal premise. If you have universal and the particular, you always start with the universal. So this is a good example. No SRM. So note that you have your S circle. This is your S circle. You have your M circle. So for no SRM, you have to shade the area between them. The entire area between them has to be shaded. The entire one. Okay. Now you do this premise. And this premise tells you some M are not P. So how do you do that? You look at the two circles again, M circle and P circle. And what you need to do is to put an X in M outside of P. And there is only one area in M outside of P which is available, and it is area 1. Because 4 is already overlapping and these two are blocked. So that would be your correct answer. That was already all you need. And that would be, of course, this one, right? Areas A, 2, and 3 are shaded, and there's an X in area 1. So fairly easy. Now if you had to answer whether it's valid or not, does it look valid to you? Just for practice purposes. Is it valid? How do you do that? Well, you are looking for this, right? This is what you're looking for. Some S are not P, so you need to have an X in S outside P. Do you have an X in S outside P? That would be area 5. No, you don't have that, so it is not valid. This is again reminders how you do it. Just look at two of them. Make sure you shade the entire part between them the way you're supposed to. So remember, we are basing it on those two circle exercises from chapter 4. So if it's supposed to be all shaded in the middle, the whole middle should be shaded. You're not just shading like this part as some students do for whatever reason. No, the whole thing should be shaded. And then it additionally asks you for the syllogistic form. So this is your Moodin figure, right? This should be easy. So what's the Moodin figure here? Well, first you are going through the letter names for all of them. So this is O, this is E, and this is O. But now note that you still have two choices, C and E. Which one is it? Well, you have to strike the line through your middle terms, and you have to remember that picture. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 4 are easy. Students get confused about 2 and 3. Remember, if you put X's where your middle other two terms are, not the middle term. The middle term is the line. The other two terms, if they are on the left, that's 2. If they are on the right, then 3. We will see an example like this shortly. So, because this is 1, this is the correct answer. So once again, remember, this is why we are doing that figure. We are drawing the line like this. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. And when they put axes, the axes stand for your predicate and subject term. The line goes through middle terms. The axes stand for these two other terms. Okay, now how do you draw this one? Where do you start? Well, they're both universal, right? So you start on top. You start with the first premise. All M are P. Again, how do you do that? You look at your M circle. You look at your P circle. And then you have to do what? Shade all M outside of P. So the entire area M outside of P circle has to be shaded. That whole area is shaded. Now next one. All M are S. This is your circle M. This is your circle S. So a lot of it is already shaded. You can double shade it. But nonetheless, the entire M outside of S should be shaded. So now you have areas 2, 1, and 4 shaded. And that's it, because you don't do the conclusion. You do not draw the conclusion. So the correct answer would be 1, 2, and 4 shaded. That's the correct answer. Now again, for practical purposes, is this supported? Is this conclusion supported? Is it valid? Again, should be a very easy answer. It's invalid, yes, because you need what? You need an x there in the middle, some SRP. You don't have any x's whatsoever, so of course it would not be supported. No doubt, but if it was Aristotelian standpoint, you could assume existence and put an x here, and then that would be supported. Obviously, that's not in the question, and it's not something you should make up, but I'm just saying that this is an example how it could actually be supported if you assume existence there. Okay, so once again, this is kind of how you do this kind of drawings. For M, you shade the entire part outside of your circle S. So all M are S, you shade all M outside of S. You kind of squish it towards, so if you have anything here, that anything would be both M and S. So all M would be S. This is why you're doing it like that. And it's a logistic form. So now we can actually try to figure out, especially with figure, what figure would be like. So what mood is of course easy, right? This is A, this is A, this is I. Great. So we have choice of these two, but is it 2 or is it 3? How do you do that? So again, remember, this is how you do it. That picture, and you don't even have to remember it, you can draw it for yourself and have it on some sort of note sheet for the final, because you actually are having open notes, right? The axes here and here represent the other two terms. So if you draw a line through your M's, this would be your axis. So which one is it? Is it 2 or is it 3? 3, of course. You see, this is the picture you get. Line on the left, axis on the right. So if you understand that, then you know it is 3, and then you know this is your correct answer. Okay. And again, this is why they put an axis, but this axis just stands for your predicate and subject term in both cases. And the line goes through your middle terms. Alright, chapter 6, our forms. Now, again, it's so much easier for you guys than for students who did it in a classroom, because you don't have to remember it. You can put all of these forms on your note sheet, and I would definitely encourage you to prepare some sort of a note sheet, because if you have to look it up every single time in a book, it will be time consuming. But if you prepare it and it will be in front of you, you can just look there. Now, you may still get it wrong because students approach it incorrectly. How do you approach something like this? How do you figure out the form? First line, always replace your letters with P and Q. So do just this, P, horseshoe, Q. Now, since this is your P and this is your Q, what is your next line? What is this? So not B is your Q. Therefore, B is not Q. Because you're keeping it P and Q. It's just the signs which are changing. And based on that, what is this? Since not H is your P, your H is not P, right? That's what it would be like. Now, does that look like anything, one of the forms? Yes, it is modus tollens, and it is valid form. And note that once you've done it like this, it looks exactly like modus tollens, so you don't have to worry about that. This is modus tollens, it's exactly like that. Otherwise, you can get confused because of all the different notations. Also remember what is sufficient and necessary condition. Again, this is sufficient condition for this, and this is necessary condition for that, and we also can remember it as sun. If you take the horseshoe and kind of twist it a little bit, you'll get sun. Now another one. So how about this one? How do you do that? Same way. So you start with P and Q. Now based on that, well, you don't have P and Q, right? Because you don't have either K or R here. So next letter alphabetically goes R, small r, and then if you still have fourth one, it is small s. So this is all the ones we always use. Okay, but instead of R, you already have something, so you just repeat your Q. Instead of K, you repeat your P, and instead of E, you now repeat your R. So this is what you got. Does that look like any of the forms we have? Be it valid or invalid? And the answer is no. It doesn't look like any of them. Does it? Really? HS? That looks like HS to you? Remember what HS is supposed to be like. If P, then Q. If Q, then R. And then if P, then R. That looks nothing like that. I mean, the letters are the same, but they are in different order. There's two Q's here. Where do you see two Q's here? That way. That's not the same at all. So that actually is invalid form. It is not HS. Pure hypothetical syllogism, this is it. See, P, Q, Q, R. So it kind of creates like a chain. It goes from P to Q, from Q to R. And then you can skip the middle part of Q and go straight from P to R. Now that is HS, pure hypothetical syllogism. And this, of course, is nothing like that, because you have the same letter here in two positions. That's not what it's supposed to be at all. Okay, back to our fallacies. Now, every player on the varsity chess team is very good, therefore the team is very good. Now I realize that in America, chess is not as popular as in Russia, but there's actually a show now on TV about chess. I don't know if you guys watching it. Hopefully, also can be helpful. Because here we have to, again, as with every fallacy, ask ourselves not one but two questions. One mistake students often do is they immediately jump into like, what fallacy does it look like? And then, therefore, it is this fallacy. But before you do that, you have to ask yourself, is it even a fallacy? And this is the most important question, because just because it looks like one of the fallacies, that doesn't necessarily be one. So which one does it look like? Well, it does look like a composition. But what is a composition? Which parts? It's not just parts to the whole. It is improper transfer of the quality from the parts to the whole. If all you remember is parts to the whole, you will get it wrong. Is it proper or improper to transfer the quality of good players from one to the whole team in chess? In other words, is chess a team kind of a game? Is it like basketball? Is it like football? Is it like soccer? And the answer to this is no, not at all. It's not a team game. This game is played one-on-one. So, is it proper to transfer this quality if you have 10 good chess players? Does that make a good chess team? You bet. This is exactly how it works, because they don't need to work together. They never work together. It's not a team game. If there are 10 good players, there are always 10 good players. They don't need time to, feel the other player's shoulder. They're not going to feel the other player's shoulder. It's one-on-one game. One player plays against the other, the opponent, who is from another team. So it is proper transfer of the quality, and therefore it is no fallacy at all. And this is the question, again, you should always ask yourself. because just because it looks like a composition doesn't mean it's a composition, and it's not. It is just no fallacy. Okay, I try to avoid questions which require this kind of knowledge on the final, but nonetheless there may be at least one question which is no fallacy for whatever reason. So never jump at oh, it looks like this fallacy, therefore it is. Always ask yourself, is it even a fallacy? It may look like one, but it may not be one. Which of the following categorical propositions is in standard form? So again, remember, how do we determine standard form of a categorical proposition? We look, first of all, it should have a quantifier, then it should have subject term, then it should have a copula, and then it should have a predicate term. Now let's look at them. Do they all have a quantifier? No, this one does not. This one does not. Do they all have a copula? No, this one does not. There's no copula here. So we eliminated 3 of them. We only have 2 left. Now we have to look at both subject and predicate term. Let's start from the bottom. Whole grain cereals. Is this a term? Yes, it is a term. How about good for the heart? Is that a term? No, that is not a term, and therefore that is also eliminated. And yes, if you look at the top one, romantic poets is a term, and supporters of the conventional Moors is a term. Why is this not a term, good for the heart? Because who's good for the heart? Good for the heart is not any particular group. You have to specify and say either food's good for the heart, or cereal's good for the heart, or whatever. If after R you don't have anything specifically specifying what it's talking about, then that is not a term. Okay, notation. Now that is actually easier than it may at first seem. So Movada and Nautica offer a black dial if and only if Peugeot has a gold watch. Now clearly you would have M, you would have N, and you would have P. It's a no-brainer. How are they connected? Well, and is translated what? Dot. If and only if is translated what? Triple bar. Note that you already have your answer. There's only one option which has both dot and the triple bar. None of the other does. So that's your correct answer. Sometimes it is as simple as that. If you require to put your parentheses, then you have to remember the other rules about parentheses, but in this case you don't even need that. So that would be your correct answer. And again, remember with triple bar, if and only if. You can also have situations with if then, just if, and only if. All 3 of them would be translated with a horseshoe, but remember that if it is just if, you have to switch around your predicate and subject the way they are here. So this is P, right? This is N, but it goes P first and second. Now this is again fairly easy for most students. It asks you about main operator. How do you figure out your main operator? Just go outside of all the parentheses and brackets. So this is brackets, this is brackets. You go outside of them, you have 2. But if you have 2, you remember the rule, everything will beat your tilde. Whatever is not tilde will be your main operator, so it will be a horseshoe. This is the main operator rules. Oak trees are shady. Shady things are not to be trusted. Therefore, oak trees are not to be trusted. Is it a fallacy? Well, obviously it sounds like it is, because clearly there is some problem here. Which one? Again, ask yourself what's going on here, and that will give you part of the answer. What's going on is some sort of ambiguity, right? So it will be one of the fallacies of ambiguity. something is used in two different senses. But how do you figure out between amphiboly and equivocation? Do you remember the rule? The rule is, if it is somebody else's words, then it is amphiboly. Is this somebody else's words? Whose words? No, nobody else is talking, so it is equivocation. Amphiboly will always be somebody else's words. Well, you should try not to. Okay. Equivocation. Now back to this stuff. Once again, when you want to figure it out, start with P and Q. So keep the notation P or Q. That's always should be your first line, just P and Q. Now, based on that, what is this? You already put something instead of your not N. And this is Q, right? So it is still Q because it still is not N. Why would it be not Q, Sarah? Did you change your sign? No, you did not. You just told yourself not N is Q. So it still is Q. Don't get confused. If both of them have not, then that's the same thing. It's just the same thing. You did not change anything. Okay, so this is your first part. What's your conclusion then? Note that here it does change. See? It changes the sign. So then instead of P, what do you put here? Now that is not P. Yeah, so this is what you got. Does it look like one of the forms we have covered? Yes, it looks similar to disjunctive syllogism, but it's not. And it doesn't have any particular name, so it is just invalid. Note that for the disjunctive syllogism, you actually need negation here and no negation here. And it makes sense, because note what's going on is when you say not P, you eliminate in P. And then, of course, what you have left is Q. And that's why it is a correct answer. Disputes. Okay, so there's the dispute we've got. Anne is saying, during the Iraq War, our troops tortured prisoners by kicking and beating them. And Steve says, don't be silly. That's not torture. It's just rough treatment. Now, what kind of a dispute is it? Again, remember, first thing, there's no political disputes and no dispositional disputes in logic. The only disputes you can have, of course, would be factual or verbal. Is it factual? Is it verbal? Well, are they disputing facts? No. The facts are pretty clear. Steve is not saying they did not kick and beat them. He's saying they did, but it's not torture. So it's not factual. It's verbal. But you have two options, vagueness or ambiguity. And again, remember, vagueness is you don't know where to draw the line. Ambiguity, you have distinct meanings. Different distinct meanings. Now, are they talking about different meanings of the word torture, or are they actually talking about whether the torture begins, whether it ends? Now, Anne is saying that they were kicking and beating them, and Steve is saying, well, that's not torture. So, essentially, they are not disagreeing about the meaning of the word torture. They are disagreeing about whether kicking and beating amounts to torture or not. Do you actually have to do something more than that? Do you need to connect, I don't know, electricity and torture them with electricity? Or is kicking and beating in itself already enough to qualify as torture? So that actually is vagueness. That is a question of where it stops being just kicking and beating and becomes torture, rather than ambiguity. I realize it may be a little bit difficult sometimes, but most students do see it right away. So that is a question of borderline, question of where do you draw the line. Okay, so remember that we got these examples about the disputes, blah blah blah. The definitions. Grain means 1, a small hard seed, 2, unit of weight, 3, arrangement of or direction of fibers. Which definition is that? Yes, if you remember the definitions, that would be a lexical definition. This is what lexical definitions do. They try to remove the ambiguity, so they list all the possible meanings. This is what you would see in a dictionary. Lexical definitions are dictionary definitions. So ordinary use in language as it is in a dictionary would be lexical. What are the other types of definitions? Stipulative, that is for the first time. Precising, this is when you remove vagueness, when you say something like the poor person is the one who makes at least $10,000 and has assets of at least $20,000, or rather less than that for the poor. So that would be something you typically see in laws. Theoretical, that is something you would normally see in science. Typically, if you have a definition which sounds a little too complicated for a dictionary, which goes like heat is the whatever process or blah blah blah, that would be theoretical. And finally, persuasive, they are meant to persuade, so it would be something very blatantly clear, like abortion is a brutal slaughter of children. Now, if that is your definition, then of course it is persuasive. Okay, most elderly people who are hospitalized with cancer eventually die from the disease. Thus, if elderly person wants to recover from cancer, he or she must at all costs refuse hospitalization. Is there a fallacy here? Yes, obviously there is one. And what exactly is going wrong? The question is, what is causing what? Is it hospitalization which is causing them to die, or is it the disease which causes them both hospitalization and death? And of course it is the second, so it is false cause. False cause is the fallacy which has to do with causes. And remember that there may be different variations of false cause, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is when we look at something happening and based on that conclude something else because it happened after that is being caused by that. Non-causa pro causa, it may not be temporally one after another, but again the question is what is causing what. Oversimplified cause, you may have multiple causes and you try to oversimplify it and say pick one of them and say this is the cause. And gambler's fallacy, when you have something like red being coming up number of times on the roulette, but it does not mean that it will be red or black next time, because this is not non-related events. In particular, false cause is very, very popular type of fallacy. I have to tell you how many times I heard it, and people really for some reason, either don't care or they unable to figure out. Figuring out what is causing what is very complicated. If you take higher level statistics courses, you will see they will talk about that, because when you have information and you have statistics, to figure out whether or not something actually is causing another thing becomes very difficult. Just because certain things are correlated doesn't necessarily mean they are causing the other. Now, one of the examples I actually want to talk about a little bit is I hear all the time so many people keep on repeating that in current political situation, saying Democrat-run states, Democrat-run cities, those Democrats are to blame because they have so much poverty, they have so much homelessness, so they are running them very badly. Now, the question immediately arises, how are these related? And it's a very complex issue because you cannot simply answer that without proper investigation. It is entirely possible, for example, that the other way is the causation goes the other way. So what is happening is cities which have a lot of poverty and states which have a lot of poverty tend to vote for the Democrats, because poor people typically vote for Democrats. So instead of Democrats causing them being poor, it is them being poor which is causing Democrats to come into power. The other thing there, if you look at many of these places, like the classic examples, New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, those are big cities. What happens in big city? Lots of people go there to take a chance, right? So if you live in a small place in Nebraska, you have a support network, you have your family, you have your friends. That means if something happens, you have somebody to help you out. If you go on a limb to New York City to look for a job, you obviously are a lot more vulnerable, and in case of some sort of calamity, you may very easily end up on the street, especially if you come from a different country. And again, those are the cities which typically attract this kind of people, the people who are trying to take a chance. Now, in current situation, especially because look at it, we have this COVID disaster, right? Who do you think would be first hit? New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, built on tourism. Tourism is a huge part of industry there, right? Lots of people there work in restaurant business, hotel business, entertainment business. These are the areas which are hit first. Of course, a rural city somewhere in Iowa which grows corn would be a lot less affected. Why would people who grow corn go out of business now? People still need corn. People still eat corn. Now people who work in a restaurant business, of course, will very easily end up without a job. And on top of that, they have huge rents in places like New York City. So then you have to come up with $3,000-4,000 a month without a job. How long will you last? So that is, again, doesn't necessarily means that Democrats are not to blame. It just means that you can never just look at something and immediately say what is causing what there. If you want to properly investigate that, you have to do an investigation into what are the local legislation. What specific laws did Democrats pass? How did these laws affect the situation? Which ones of them had what kind of effect? And like I said, this is very, very difficult to figure out. You need a lot of statistics, you need an expert who'd be able to work on that and give an answer. And more often than not, it will be, again, type of oversimplified cause, because there's usually going to be a number of causes. Situation is never as simple as that. So once again, that is like just an example how people like to oversimplify something which actually is not simple at all. Okay, and finally, each word in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is very ordinary. Therefore, Gettysburg Address must be very ordinary speech. Is that a fallacy? And if so, which one? Okay, so yeah, when you again have something like this, it's transfer of quality. Is it an improper transfer of quality? Well, you bet. Obviously, Gettysburg Address is not an ordinary speech. So what's going on? They're transferring it. Are they transferring it from parts to the whole or from whole to the parts? From parts to the whole. And so it is a composition. Note that if it was the other way around, then it would be division. Again, remember, composition from parts to the whole, division would be the other way. Okay, that is all the review we have for today. Are there any questions? Okay, let me go back because I don't remember what was question 14. Why did I remove the negation from the first line? Well, the first line I always remove negation. That's just the way to approach it, right? It's always easy if you start with P and Q. You obviously don't have to, but you will just make it more difficult for yourself if you're gonna start with negations, and then you will never get it to match this, right? But in order for you to figure out whether it is the form, you have to make it match. So unless you are very good and able in your head to do all these difficult operations, which not many people actually can, you are better off starting with no negations, and then just to see whether the rest of this fits the pattern. And if it does, if it will come up exactly like that, then it is the correct answer, because note that the first line, in none of them you will not have a negation, right? If you look back at all the forms, none of them has first line with negation. They have negations after the first line, but not the first line. Okay? Any other questions? Here? Because that does not has negation, right? So if you put yourself like a remark, I decided that Q is not B, right? So you decided that you put Q here for not B. Then what B is going to be? If Q is not B, then what is B? Clearly that will be not Q, wouldn't it? Doesn't it make sense? Okay. Yeah, so just be consistent. I'm not spelling everything out, but this is a kind of course, assumed. If you decided that this is your P and this is your Q, then based on that, what the other one's going to be is just already determined by this. Okay. Alright, so I guess if that's all the questions, that probably is going to be all for today. Like I said, we will continue on Thursday. That will be our last lecture. And then after that, if you guys want to take 101 with me, I will be happy to see you as my students. If not, then I guess that's it. I don't really teach anything else other than 101 and 102. Okay, anything else? The exam will be, no, the 7th is Sunday, isn't it? The exam will be on Tuesday, which I think is the 9th. Let me see. The 8th. The 8th. It is the 8th, yeah. It's not the 7th. 7th is Monday, right? Well, it is on the syllabus, so, and I will open it up again at midnight, and it will be running for 24 hours, so you can do it anytime you want. If you are like prefer to do it at 2 a.m., you can do it at 2 a.m. If you do it in the morning, afternoon, be my guest, but you have to do it in that 24-hour period. I guess once again I will allow people to take it a few hours late, but then I will deduct 10% for late submission. So do not do that. But I always get students who message me next day or whatever and saying, I missed it, oh my god. And of course I feel bad about, failing them in class just because of this. So I will take 10% penalty for that. Don't do that. Okay, this is all we have then. I will see you on Thursday for the second part of the review. Have a good next couple of days.